Hey everyone, this is Mike from Unknown Tech. Today we're going to do something a little bit differently. Generally, I post a blog every Sunday, and you can see here I was posting blogs the last couple weeks on the cloud operating model. We're going to take a little break from that and actually do something a little bit more fun and associate with what you guys are doing at home or how you can test some of the technologies that I mentioned in my blog posts. So you can see here on my blog, unknowntech.io, you can see here the heading here, MS Homelab 2023. If you click that, this will give you details on my current Homelab as it sits today. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually walk through this a little bit, and we'll talk about some of the decisions I made and talk about Homelab hardware. This will be a multi-part series, and we're really going to focus on the hardware side and some of the SaaS solutions that I'm leveraging for my Homelab for testing. Obviously, I'm using WordPress as an example for the blog. I'm using Cloudflare as a forwarder and content filter for the blog. So, there are services that all of you can use to actually, do whatever you need to do, but also host your own services internally in your home. So let's get started here. Let's go to Acceladra. So I was actually shown this by another YouTuber that I actually watch. He's actually very, very good. He has a very good home blog series. His name is Christian Lempa. So, props to him for actually showing us this. He uses this for his drawings. Now, what I'd say is it's not as powerful as Visio, and it doesn't have, the stencils that Visio has, etc. So, really, I like it for more, just like drawing and mapping out things to make it look somewhat decent. So this is the Homelab topology. It's a physical topology as it sits today. Right now, I'm going to start to the left. So let's start here and on the cloud IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS services that I'm consuming. So first and foremost, I have a domain. Domain's called unknowntech.io. And I have a subdomain called home.unknowntech.io, which is my internal domain. It's actually owned and registered with Cloudflare, and I basically forward all my traffic through Cloudflare, at least my external traffic anyway, and any traffic that's going to need to hit any of my resources running in my subdomain at home as well. You see here to the top left, I have Backblaze. Backblaze is actually used for backup for my files on my NAS, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. We'll skip over Cloudflare. I've already mentioned that. I'm actually using Google Nest for my properties. Now, I have a few properties, some Airbnb, some rentals in my actual home. And I use Nest for the thermostats, as well as the fire and CO, or excuse me, the fire alarms, the carbon dioxide alarms, etc. At the homes. And in my personal home, I actually use Google Nest Protect, which is the alarm system. The other homes, I only use the Nest thermostats and the CO2 sensors as well as the fire sensors. But I use Ubiquiti, which is the next thing we're going to talk about here. Ubiquiti Unified Cloud. And Ubiquiti runs all of my networks in all of my locations. So basically I have focused on my home here. We'll talk more about what I have here at home, but basically I have Dream machines or Dream routers at all my locations. So at my home I have the latest Dream machine SE. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. But at my other locations I have the Dream router, which actually is a pretty cool device as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the networking section. And then, of course, with Ubiquiti Unified Cloud, I'm able to actually manage all my devices, through my phone or through the web interface. And like I said, this is going to be a multi-part series, so we'll have a deep dive on networking and how I have my networking set up. This is more the physical topology. I do have other networking services that are virtual. Again, we'll deep dive more into the virtual side in the networking section of this when we get to that. But let's move over to the right here, and you can see here I have AWS, Azure, and GCP, and I have VPNs connected to all three cloud providers. And in general, this is not really for personal use. This is basically used for work because I work for Nutanix, and our services can extend into the cloud as well for AWS, Azure, and GCP. So it's nice to have that connectivity into my VPCs or VNets within the cloud providers. I talked about using WordPress. Of course, my blog is actually running WordPress, WordPress is actually hosting my blog, and that's where I have it. And then I use a new solution called Rafe. And when we get into the cloud native section of the lab, and we get into that segment, we'll talk more about what that is. It's basically a multi-cloud Kubernetes SaaS solution, which is actually pretty phenomenal. I mean, if you look at other solutions like Rancher and Kubernetes and those types of things, it's similar to that, but I think this is, they basically brought everything together when it comes to multi-cloud Kubernetes management. I do have Spectrum for internet. It's not great. I'll tell you that. It's not. I can't get fiber or Fios, unfortunately, at my home. It's not available. But it's 50 up and a 500 down, 500 meg down. So it's not bad. It serves its purpose. I don't really have any issues. It's rarely an outage. I wish I could get multi providers connection through here, and I can actually do that with the Unifi UDM Pro SE, but I can't do that right now. So there's only Spectrum as far as a single provider right now. They provide the cable modem, of course, and then I hand that off to my Unifi UDM SE, which is over here in the rack. And let's talk about this rack here. So on top of the rack sits a QNAP NAS. So let's talk about that. I'll show you a picture of that here. So if we go here, this is what the QNAP NAS looks like. This is a TS1685 NAS. It's fairly old. It's probably about 4 years old now, maybe a little bit longer. It has a first-gen Xeon D processor, and we'll talk about why I invested in the Xeon D throughout my lab. It's really, one of my needs was really keeping the power usage down and the heat dissipation to a minimum, right? So that was the goal of the lab, while providing enterprise-grade features, and that's really what the Xeon D platform gives me. So let's get into detail of lab or the NAS here. So let's click out of here, and I'm logged into the NAS now, and I'm just going to go into Control Panel. We'll go to General Settings, and we'll actually look at the system status. So you can actually see some of the information I'm talking about. So again, it is a Xeon D 1521. It's a 4-core, 8-thread CPU, and it does a fairly good job for what I use the NAS for. So primarily the NAS is used for cold storage, for a couple VMs and containers for core services. So it basically houses Active Directory, DNS, and other core services running in containers like Portainer, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, as well as Uptime Kuma, which shows the uptime of my lab, and have all my devices connected to that. I actually just set that up, and I actually have to do some more configuration of that. When I got the NAS, it only had 16 gigabytes of RAM. I immediately ripped that out, and I actually added in 4 by 32 gig of DDR4 ECC memory. What's cool about the QNAP NAS, you can actually run 2 versions of their software. So you have QUTS Hero and QTS, which is the original version of the software for this. So QUTS Hero allows you to run basically your storage ZFS, right? So I'm not doing that. I'm actually just running QTS. I may do that in the future as soon as I'm able to offload some of the files and recover that in a quick manner. Right now, I don't have a second NAS, which is what's going to happen is eventually, probably next year, this NAS will become the secondary backup NAS, and I'll purchase a new NAS. And I've been happy with QNAP, to be honest. I know a lot of folks talk about Synology, or they build their own with TrueNAS, etc. I've tried all that, to be honest with you. I tried that many years ago, and it just becomes a pain when you're having to manage it. It's gotten a lot better, put it that way. But back then it wasn't as good as it is now. So that's the reason why I chose to go the NAS route. So let's get out of here and we'll look at the storage real quick. So I can go into storage and snapshots, and I'll talk about what's within the NAS here. So under disk and VJBOD, right, it actually gives you a view of the actual NAS, and it highlights, as you highlight the drive slot, it basically highlights the actual device, what the model is it, the smart information, the temperature, etc. Okay. So essentially what I have here is in this NAS here, it actually internally can hold 6 M.2 devices internally. Now, this is an older NAS, so they're not PCIe, basically it's SATA based M.2. So, I mean, I could, if I wanted to add additional SATA SSDs, I certainly could do that. Within the device itself, there are 6 slots for M.2 devices. And it actually came with heat sinks for the M.2s, even though the SATAs are probably not, don't throw off enough heat really for heat sinks. But it's nice. It was a nice option that they included that. In the front, right, you have 4 2.5-inch bays here, and you have 12 3.5-inch bays. Now, the 3.5-inch bays can also do 2.5-inch drive size, so it's both. So within these first 4 here, this is my virtualization and container storage, right? These are basically 4 Samsung Enterprise SSDs, 480 gigabyte SSDs, okay? And this is an RAID 5, and it's in its own pool, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The other disks over here to the left, these are actually running Seagate IronWolf 1 terabyte SSDs. So there's 4 SSDs here, again in a RAID 5, which are acting as a Q tier for the spinning disk down here. So these 8 disks are running Seagate Exos 16 terabyte drives, and there's actually 8 of them, okay? And basically I'm running I believe I have to go check and see, but I think I'm running a RAID 6 with this. And so my cold storage is actually, again, the 16 terabyte Exos spinning disks. The hot tier, or I would say the warm tier, is the IronWolf Pro drives here. And then I also have caching built within this too. So there is PCIe expansion slots in this NAS. And you can't see it here, but in the back, you essentially can install 2 PCIe devices, and I have 1 QNAP dual M.2 PCI add-in card that's actually housing 2 Intel Optane 1600X, I believe they are, 18 gig SSDs. I have to double check, but essentially what it is it's the caching tier, right? So you have your cache. This is in a RAID 1 mirror. I'm doing read and write cache. And then I have the hot tier, the warm tier, or middle tier, whatever you want to call it. That's running the NAS for Q tier. And then I have my colder tier running my file storage. So essentially, I have about 80 terabytes usable capacity. And then these 4 drives, again, they're only 4 480 gig RAID 5 Samsung Enterprise drives. And that's in its own separate data volume, and that volume essentially houses all the container storage and the virtual storage. Again, just for core services, I don't run a lot on this because, again, it's only 4 cores, 8 threads. It's an older Xeon D solution, so I want to make sure that I'm not impacting any of the storage services that I want to run on this. I do not use this NAS for external storage, for anything, for virtualization, for containers, or anything like that, other than the virtualization containers that's running on the device itself. We're not going to get into details on what I'm running yet. That'll be in the software section when we do part 2 of this video. But we're going to move on in the interest of saving time. So let's move on here. So by the way, this is connected, all my devices are 10 gig connected into this switch down here. We'll talk about that switch here in a minute. But let's talk about this. So essentially I have, a 9U Tripp-Lite rack, okay? And this rack was meant to be placed on the wall. I haven't done that because to the right-hand side of this picture here is really is being redone right now. This is one of the rooms in my basement that has not been finished. Everything else has been finished, and that actually just got completed. And this summer, this room will also be finished, and I'll be able to set this up right. It actually looks, like I'm in a dungeon, right, with this gray block, etc. But that'll all be framed and sheetrocked, and there'll be some air handling that's going to be put in place to handle and accommodate the heat. It's actually pretty low heat because of the fact that it is Xeon D and they actually run pretty cool at low wattage. But there is some heat dissipation coming off of this. So I also have some other things within the rack, and I'm going to skip over the network. So I have obviously this Tripp-Lite PDU, and this PDU has one receptacle right up front, and the rest are in the back, right? So you can't see those. I love the one up front because I can actually, if I want to bring something over here and test it, or if I need to pull something out and run it back over here and just test it real quick without it actually racking something, it's pretty cool that I could do that. And then I have this NavPoint mesh pass-through panel, and that basically is running some cabling into the switching here. That is, basically external cables. You can see here I have a lot of front-facing cables. That's because of the Supermicro cases and the platforms that I'm using. Essentially are front-facing as far as I/O is concerned, and so that's why you see these short cables here, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So let's get to the switching real quick. So obviously the first network device is my UDM SE, right? This is a great device. I love it. Again, we're going to get into more detail on this. And look, this is one of the standards that we see out there today, right? So if you are in any of the forums or Reddit in the Homelab section, a lot of folks are using unified devices from Ubiquiti. Before I had this, I was using a EdgeMax router, which I loved. That was also a great device. But I decided to move away from EdgeMax and Amplify and went to all Unifi, and I haven't looked back. I love it. Unifi basically consolidates a lot of things, a lot of services. They've added a ton of services within the device, so you can actually not only can you do networking, your controller as far as unified network controller. It also does your NVR. So if you wanted to add a hard drive, which I actually have a hard drive in here, I actually got to pull it out because I added an NVR down here. But I've added a hard drive in here. You can actually set this up to do NVR functionality. It has access control. It has unified talk, which is voice. So there's a lot of services that you can run off of the SE. It's a pretty phenomenal device that provides a lot of consolidation around some services. This is the SE model, which I definitely wanted to get. I actually bought it when it was not in stock off of eBay, so I paid a little bit more than you'd pay from Ubiquiti. I think I paid $100 more because this device was worth it. Because this one comes with a bigger SSD than the original, the non-SE, and also PoE ports. So the switch ports within the device are PoE capable, and whereas the other one was not. You get two WAN ports. One is 2.5 gig, and the other one is 10 gig, which is nice. 1 gig, which is nice. And you also have a 10 gig port here. And this 10 gig port actually is what I'm connecting to my 10 gig switch. So let's move on to that. So this is the XG24 10 gig switch from Ubiquiti. You're probably wondering why I don't have a 1 gig switch. To be honest, all the devices that I need to use PoE or require 1 gig, I have enough ports. You can see I have one port left over from usage here. I would say that I probably will buy not a 48 porter, but maybe a 24 porter port 1 gig switch at some point. But I actually do need to get a bigger rack. So I might have I'm at a rack unit space, right, in this rack. So for what I need to do right now, though, it actually is perfect. So again, these are all 10 gig ports, right? They can all be 10 gig, 5 gig, 2.5 gig, 1 gig ports. But I run everything in 10 gig that you see connected here. I use this 10 gig switch as the aggregation as well. Probably not best practice. Unifi does have a 10 gig aggregation switch, which you can get. But again, I'm out of space and I don't really have the capacity to do that. And so you can see here to the left-hand side, I have the small cables that are going to my servers. Basically, 2 10 gig ports per server. And there's 4 servers that you see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll talk about what those servers are and what they do for my lab. Over to the right-hand side, I have 2 ports going into the NAS, one to service primary file traffic, right? CIFS and SMB and NFS. And the management. And I also have another port that is leveraged for the virtualization and the container core services traffic for the lab. Another port that I'm using here is this one has 2 10 gig SFP ports. I'm going to skip over the servers for a minute and go down to the UNVR. This is a 4-bay UNVR from Ubiquiti. Within this I have 4 terabyte Seagate NAS drives, and there's 4 terabytes, so they are in basically a RAID 5. So basically I have obviously less than 12 terabytes of storage. I want to say it's around 10 terabytes of usable storage, which really is good enough for the amount of cameras that I have. So if you look up here in the top UDM SE, you see I have 2 yellow cables coming out, a blue cable and a green one. Those are basically IPMI port cables. And then I have 2 cameras connected as well. And basically I only have 2 cameras in my house, and they actually serve a great purpose because I have 1 camera in the front, that's my Ring or my Google Nest doorbell. And then I have 2 G4 Pro bullets that are in the front and the back of my house. So it pretty much covers most of the house. I do need to add 1 more camera, so that's what this empty port's for. And that camera will be over the garage downstairs. I actually have, out of the side of my house, a garage that runs out of the basement. And I need to put a camera and floodlight over that, which I have not done yet, which I'll do this summer. The UNVR connects 10 gig via SFP into the XG24. So again, pretty much everything is connected 10 gig with the exception of anything connected to the 1 gig ports within the UDM SE. And then everything else essentially is running wirelessly except my office. So I'm sitting in my office and I have 1 more switch that's not pictured here, and that switch is a 10 gig. It's another XG switch from Ubiquiti. It's 4 ports, 10 gig, and that way I can provide 10 gig to my office for my house. So in the downstairs I have a Unifi 6 long range that covers the entire basement. That's being powered off of the switch here. And upstairs here I have the Unifi 6 mesh system. I have the barrel mesh point, and then I have 2 in-wall mesh points at either end of the house. And so that covers the entire house and actually works very, very well. I would say, I went from a Amplify Alien system. I did not like the Amplify Alien system. I think their range on it was horrible. When I first got it, it wasn't great. And over time, the firmware made it a little bit better, but it wasn't a great system. And I'm just completely invested in Unifi now as far as my switching, routing, firewall, etc. Again, when we get into more details on the power and capability of the UDM SE, it's pretty powerful. Okay, so let's get into the servers. Okay, so the 4 servers that I have are all the same CPU motherboard. So let's go and look at that real quick. So the servers that I have are based on the Xeon D and 2nd generation processors, okay, the Skylake processors. So Intel Xeon processor D2146NT, that's an 8-core, 16-thread CPU. And I love these motherboards because of all the connectivity you get. So you get a ton of connectivity and a ton of capability in a very, very small package. Network capability, storage capability, it's exactly what you need. I would say it's a little bit lacking in the CPU department. It does what I need it to do for now, but you can actually run up to 512 gigabytes of RAM on these boards. So in the first three servers, these are basically my Nutanix nodes that I use for work for demos. I actually have 256 gigs of RAM, and I'm running two 1.6 terabyte S3610 Intel Enterprise SSDs. And then for the M.2 slot, I actually have an Intel, I want to say it's an S4610, I believe. M.2, I think it's a 256 gig M.2 SSD. And that actually houses the operating system, so the Nutanix AOS. And this is a cluster, right? So I have three nodes. Let's go back to my drawing. And you can see here Nutanix node 1, 2, and 3, all the same. And that's a cluster, distributed cluster running the Nutanix software. And I use that for all my Nutanix software. We'll talk more about that later. And that's what I use for demos. The next node I have is exactly the same thing other than the RAM. So I only have 128 gigs of memory in this node. This node runs vSphere 8 and vSAN 8, the latest. I do have to update it. I know, I believe update 1 just came out. I haven't done the updates yet. So this runs basically vCenter, vSAN, and one ESX, and then nested ESX servers within this. It's funny, I'm actually running OSA vSAN on a single node. I know there's no resiliency, but it's a lab, and I don't care what happens to it. There's no data that needs to stay in place. It's used for demos, and I'm running OSA for the physical vSAN, and then for the nested vSAN, I'm running ESA, which is pretty cool. And that allows me to actually do demos. Primarily, demos are for migration from VMware into Nutanix, right? So I actually show migrations, how easy that is using our tools that we have, and I can actually use this as a validation of migration of VMware to Nutanix. Okay, so I do have an APC unit. You can see it here. I don't think you can see it in the picture. Let's go back to the picture to see. Yeah, so really it's right here. You can't see it, but I have a standalone APC unit. It's definitely enough to handle all these devices here because they're so low power. And I believe it gives me, it's not a lot, like 3 minutes of uptime, 3 or 4 minutes of uptime. I do need to upgrade this. It actually is a little older. The batteries are still good. Everything works great. But I think it only gives me about 3 minutes of uptime. I have to double check. And I'm adding another server here, which we'll talk about here in a minute, for personal use, which I want to go back and just discuss real quick about this motherboard. So this embedded device here, this embedded solution, I have 5 of these motherboards, and I know I only showed you 4. Out of the 5, 2 actually have failed me. The last one, the first one that failed within the first week I've had it, and it fell under warranty, and I was able to get it RMA'd. Not a big deal. This one, the second one that's failed, is out of warranty, and I sent it back to Supermicro, and they are actually going to fix it, but I have to pay for it. So I believe it's a $45 charge just to triage the issue, and then they charge you, I think, $95 an hour plus the part to actually fix the issue. So if you look at the prices of these, they're still very, very expensive, and they're not worth it. To be honest, I wouldn't buy one of these new today. You can do so much more with used, even EPYC solutions, right? You can get, the latest EPYC processor is out, Genoa, platform is out, and EPYC Milan is still a great, great solution. You can get 3D V-Cache in EPYC Milan. Now it's not low power like these, right? So you're not going to meet the same requirements around power, but the power you get for the cost. I mean, if you look at this motherboard, I think these motherboards are still going for upwards of $1,300-$1,400, even higher. I've seen $1,600, which I think is ridiculous this day and age. This motherboard really should be around $800 tops 700 tops right now. But it's one of these devices that doesn't really sell a lot, so I think that's why the prices are so high on these as far as the demand, supply demand, right? I also want to go back to what I originally talked about. I'm kind of disappointed in the quality of this board, to be honest, because again, I have 5 of them, and 2 of them went bad. That's a pretty bad failure percentage, right? So the other one is at Supermicro right now getting repaired, and that's going to be, leads me into the next topic here, the new server I'm going to be adding. So if you look over here to the right, you see I'll have a server on top of the rack called Proxmox, and that's exactly what this is going to be running. So this server is going to be running Proxmox. I have Intel Optane devices standing by for this server. So essentially I have 905p, I believe, 480 gig add-in card, and I also have one U.2 960 gig Optane device. I think that's a 900p it's a 900p, I believe. And then I have 4 SSDs, 1.6 terabyte Intel S3610 SSDs for additional SSD storage. And then I have an M.2 and a SATA, mini SATA M.2 as well for the Proxmox installation. So this is again a personal device for the Homelab, which will be running some VMs, and mostly it'll be running Kubernetes. Okay, so basically this will be a single physical server housing multiple Ubuntu virtual machines, which will be running both Docker and Kubernetes. And we'll have more information and more blog posts and videos about that at a later date. To the right hand side, of course, I have my IoT devices. I know I have more than this. I think I just did the main ones, but I talked about the Unifi 6G4 Pros for home. I have Philips Hue, of course. I have Nest Protect, which is the alarm system, and I run all my video devices from Apple TV 4K. But I also have smart TVs. All my TVs are smart. Some of them, I have a projector down in the basement for my home theater room, which we'll do a tour of that as part of this, because I have a pretty unique setup downstairs in the basement. And we'll get into some of the more IoT devices there, but I also have sensors, right, for the Unifi Protect and all the windows and doors, etc., and some other devices as well, which we'll get into. So I think that about sums up the lab right now, right? So I covered all the devices, and again, you really have to go back and again, this doesn't have to be for you, right? These are older devices. Some of these devices are older, right? The NAS is older. I gave you the reasons why I wouldn't buy this platform today. Matter of fact, 3rd gen is already out, and 3rd gen has 25 gig networking, which is actually pretty cool. Very expensive though. I go back to how expensive as far as the capability of the platform. So if you look and see all the networking, and you can't really see it in this picture. Let me see if I can get a picture of this here real quick to show you the actual networking. Right. So if you look at this, right, if you look at this picture, I mean, you get a ton of connectivity, right? So you basically get 4 10 gig ports, 2 SFP plus, 2 RJ45, right? And then you get 4 1 gig and then IPMI. So from a network connectivity for Homelab, it's phenomenal. Now, some folks are saying that 25 gig is a new 10 gig. I'm not quite there yet. I don't think I'll be there for a while, to be honest with you. 10 gig is doing everything I need to do right now. I don't have all NVMe storage within my Nutanix environment, or I do have some NVMe in the vSAN, the single vSAN node, but it's NVMe caching, front-ending SSDs, right? So I don't have anything that's all NVMe yet. The Proxmox server is going to be the closest. I still think 10 gig will be fine for what I need to do right now. But in the future, when I start replacing these, and I will be replacing these in the next couple of years, I will be looking at, more than likely, I may be moving to AMD, right? Maybe going to Epic platform. and possibly 25 gig if 25 gig is being offered in, Ubiquiti, because I really like Ubiquiti a lot. One of the things I do need to look at possibly getting is a load balancer, a physical load balancer. I will be implementing NetScaler Virtual Edition, which gives you a free edition up to 20 meg throughput. So we'll see. I have to figure out what I'm going to do as far as load balancing. I do want an F5, to be honest with you, because I see F5 let a lot of customers. But I also see Citrix NetScaler a lot of customers as well. So I may just stick with Citrix. I'm not sure yet. We'll see what happens. But I definitely need to implement load balancer, especially when it comes to Kubernetes, ingress, et cetera, et cetera. But again, I probably wouldn't go for this board today. But if you can get these used for a cheap price, maybe you do look at it, right? Because you get a ton of PCIe, ton of networking ports. You got U2 ports, right, for storage. These can break out into 4 SATA, or you can have one U.2, right? You can break this out into U.2 for an NVMe device, right, for each of these ports. And of course, you have regular SATA ports. You have NVMe M.2 regulars, up to 2110 size, right, for the enterprise grade M.2s. And then you have, basically a mini M.2 where you can actually put in a small SATA device like I do for the Proxmox server to actually load the OS. So again, a lot of connectivity on this board. It's one of the reasons why I liked it. But I also wish I had a little bit more CPU power. I haven't run into any issues yet, right? Glaring issues, but I'm not running a lot of databases or transactional workload, et cetera, where CPU will be pushing a lot, right? Or storage activity that would push the CPU a ton, right? So again, it's Homelab stuff. So, okay, let's go back real quick here. Let's make sure I covered everything. Yeah, I think I did. Again, you can go whatever route you want with your Homelab, right? There's so many options out there. Everything from all the way from Raspberry Pi, like the lowest compute, lowest RAM, small footprint, very little power, all the way up to enterprise grade gear that you can purchase, in a forum or Reddit or on eBay, right? So there are folks that have all different types of Homelabs. In mine, I'm trying to meet a middle ground, right? I want a middle ground of low power, low heat, and make it, enterprise grade, and not have to really go back to Raspberry Pi. I'm not saying Raspberry Pis are not good for certain things. They certainly are good for certain things. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at, there's a Raspberry Pi rack system with blades that actually folks are working on, that I'm waiting for that to play out to see how that works, because I think there's a lot of great use cases for a 1U rack of I think it held 16 nodes of Raspberry Pi, which I think would be awesome for like a Kubernetes cluster, for example, like K3s. But also, if you wanted to use like enterprise equipment, get a bigger rack. A lot of folks have, full size racks within their basement or their garages or their closets, and they're running full-on enterprise gear. I've seen NetApp, EMC devices, everything, right? To be honest, a few, 4 or 5 years ago, you had some options, but you don't have all the options you have today. You have a ton of options today, right? For virtualization, for containers, for Kubernetes. Like I said, everything from Raspberry Pi to mid-range, low power stuff like this, to enterprise grade gear as well. So I hope you liked the video. I know it was kind of long-winded. We'll get into the part 2. Part 2 will probably come in a few weeks. I want to get back into the cloud operating model blog post. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you in the next one.